Excellent. All right. Well, thank you everyone for being here, and to the Friends of the Belmont Public Library for helping to make this event possible. My name is Amy Lousteau, and I'm the Community Outreach Librarian here at the Belmont Public Library. I invite you all to get in touch with me with any questions or program ideas or anything at all. I'll go ahead and put my email address and phone number in the chat. And I'll also, near the end of the program, be putting a survey link in the chat. So if you could grab that before the program ends and fill out the survey, that would be great. And then just to note, as I just said, we're recording tonight's session. We'll have some time for Q&A at the end, but feel free to put your questions in the chat as they occur to you. So Carol Orange has worked in the art world for more than 20 years. She began as a research editor on art books in London and later became an art dealer in Boston. She has an MBA from Simmons University and worked as a marketing manager at the Polaroid Corporation. Along with concert pianist Virginia Eskin, who played Chopin's music, she read excerpts from George Sand's novels in 3 salons at the French Library in Boston. Her short story, Delicious Dates, was included in Warren Adler's 2010 short story anthology. Another story, Close Call, appeared in the Atherton Review, Volume 2. Thank you so much, Carol.
Thank you, Amy, for the introduction. I'm very pleased to be here tonight, and I'm happy to answer questions as they appear in the chat, although I believe you have some questions for me, Amy. Is that correct? Okay.
So you wanted to start with my questions?
Yes, please.
Okay, great. Let's do it. So what inspired you to write A Discerning Eye, and how long did it take you?
Okay, what inspired me was that I was an art dealer in Boston, very much like my protagonist, Portia Malatesta, although I'm not exactly like Portia, but we do share that. And when the robbery happened at the Gardner Museum, like 1:30 on the night of March 18th, and we read about it the next day or in the Boston Globe, it was so shocking because the Gardner is such a gem of a museum in Boston. It's so beautiful. It's, you know, full of really entrancing art. And, you know, Isabella Gardner was an extraordinary woman. You know, she was very wealthy and she could have done lots of things with her money, but she chose to be an art collector. And she was really smart about it. She hired Bernard Berenson, who was a scholar at Harvard in the Italian Renaissance. So Berenson taught her a lot about art. And so some of the Italian paintings, Italian Renaissance paintings in the Gardner were brought to her by Berenson. He advised her to buy them. And so, you know, you have Titian's Rape of Europa, you have, you know, Precious Giotto, and, you know, it's just really a remarkable collection. But Isabella went off on her own after a while, and she bought the Vermeer, the concert. She bought that on her own at a auction in Paris. And, you know, it had nothing to do with Berenson. And in fact, Vermeer was not well known at the time. But Isabella was really taken with this painting, and she bought it, you know, for $6,000 at the time. You know, it's now worth many, many millions. Although, you know, it was one of the stolen paintings. So I was so furious that thieves dared to go into our precious Gardner Museum and remove 13 works of art. So I immediately started thinking about it. I started thinking, you know, who could have done it? Why would they have done it? What would have motivated someone to steal this art and deprive the citizens of Boston and really the international community, because the Gardner Museum is known throughout the world. You know, I was just so angry. So I started to think about writing a book about it. Actually, I was going to write a short story about it because that's what I knew how to do. And that's what inspired me. It did take me about 10 years to write the book. I had never written a novel before, and it is a daunting, a daunting experience. You know, I think I went through maybe 20, at least 20 revisions, if not more. And, you know, while I was writing it, I also had a full-time job, so I couldn't just focus on the novel. So I went to many writers' workshops, one in Boston at Grub Street, one in California, you know, one in several in New York. And I joined a writing group at the New York Society Library in New York. I was living in New York up until pretty recently when I moved to Chicago to be close to my family. But it's, to write a whole novel is daunting. I'm hoping that the next one I write won't take me 10 years. It better not. But, you know, I was intimidated by the form of a novel. So it, you know, it was definitely, you know, a sort of stop and go kind of procedure. I would write something, then I would put it away and look at it weeks later and say, oh, this is just awful. How could I have written this? And I would, you know, rip it up and start all over again. So it really helped to get good feedback. When I mean good critical feedback from lots of people who I looked up to and admired. And, you know, slowly it started to take shape. So that's how long it took me. And that was kind of the process. I did learn to have an outline because initially I just wrote whatever came into my head. And one of the members of my writing group taught me how to write an outline, and that really made a huge difference. I did have a whole other character who didn't make it into the final book. I decided that one of the two policemen, or one of the two people who posed as policemen at the Gardner, I decided that he was a Chinese immigrant who worked by day for a Chinese restaurant. And he was solicited by the mafia into being one of these two policemen. So I developed this whole story about this guy named Chan, and I really, really liked him. But it, you know, I had to give him up because there were just too many characters, too many important characters, not secondary characters. So I had to give John up. So that's part of the process of writing a novel. So do you have another question, Amy?
Yes, I was just thinking, I believe Stephen King refers to that as killing your darlings, when you have to eliminate things that you're just so emotionally attached to.
Yes.
What motivated you to have Portia, the protagonist, analyze the stolen paintings?
Okay, well, following what was happening, after the crime had been committed, it didn't seem that the police or the FBI were actually looking at the paintings. And so, being an art dealer, I wondered why did they steal the Vermeer when it was not, I mean, it's a fabulous painting. I adore it, but why did they steal that particular painting and not the Rape of Europa, the Titian, which is considered even more valuable? Why did they steal the Degas drawings when right next to the Degas drawings is a Michelangelo drawing? Why didn't they steal the Michelangelo? And then I wondered, why in the Blue Room, which is chock full of all kinds of paintings and drawings, all of them framed, the Blue Room's on the first floor, as you may remember. Why did they steal Chez Tortoni by Manet when there were sergeants in the room, small sergeants? And, so I started to wonder, all right, why would they have stolen those paintings? And so Portia analyzes each painting and looks for an underlying theme. And she comes up with the theme of the tension between dark and light. And she could find it in everything except one of the Degas drawings. But it exists in all of the paintings that were stolen, all of the Rembrandts, the Vermeer, the Chez Tortoni, which is, this gentleman who's dressed to the nines in a top hat and tails. And he's he's sitting at a cafe table, and there's half of a glass of wine on the table, but half of his face is in shadow, and he looks troubled. So I wondered, does this man speak to the potential robber? Why did they choose this? And this was never done in real life. So, in fact, Portia, from this analysis, develops a psychological profile of the thief. She decides that the thief was tortured by the light and dark aspects in his life. And so he was drawn to the paintings that also had this tension between dark and light.
Oh, I love that. That's great. Why do you believe that there was a mastermind behind the theft?
Because it seems that there was a shopping list. The thieves were in the Gardner for 81 minutes, which is extraordinary. In most art thefts, thieves are in and out in like half an hour at the most. I mean, sometimes it's 10 minutes or 20 minutes. So the fact that they were there for 81 minutes and that they went to 3 different rooms. They went to the Dutch room, they went to the short gallery, and then they went to the Blue Room on the first floor. It feels like there was a shopping list involved. And particularly, you know, when you look at all the works of art together, you know, and you see what they didn't steal. So it feels like it was someone's shopping list, a person, even, and that the two men who posed as policemen, you know, had been hired to execute the actual theft. That's why I believe there's a mastermind. And the other thing, very sadly, is that 31 years later, we have no idea of where these paintings are. You know, I just can only imagine that they're in someone's home, and that that person selfishly is enjoying the art and depriving the public of its beauty. So that's why I think there had to be a mastermind. You know, in other cases of stolen art, thieves have stolen art for themselves, and you know, they've only taken like maybe one or two pieces. The fact that there were 13 pieces is really incredible. I know in the docuseries that has just been released by Netflix, there was talk about the motivation. The FBI was talking about the motivation being a get out of jail card. So it was based on Miles Connor, who is a real person and a very colorful person. And he has been put in jail for other art thefts. And he once stole a Rembrandt from the Museum of Fine Arts, and he offered it as a get out of jail card to the FBI. But you only need one painting to do that. You wouldn't need 13 works of art to accomplish that. So anyway, that's that's why I believe there had to be a mastermind, because 13 pieces were stolen in 3 different places. There seemed to be an underlying theme and a shopping list. So that's my hypothesis. So are there, oh, let me see if there are questions. All right.
It looks like we do have 2 questions. Would you like me to read them to you?
I'd love you to. Thank you.
Okay, so Eric wants to know, do you think anyone involved in the search of the stolen art will reach out to you about the mastermind profile, or has anyone?
I love that, Eric.
Great question. It's very optimistic.
Thank you. Thank you for that question. No, I don't really think so. I mean, you know, no one has approached me. No one's offered me a job. Although they did offer Portia a job as a consultant, the FBI in my novel, but no one. I wish they would. It would really be interesting, because I want those paintings back. They have to get back to the Gardner. They, you know, there are those empty frames on the wall that are just so haunting.
Yes, absolutely. All right, we have another question from Grania. Was it because you had such an appreciation of the art and a respect for Isabella that it took you so long to write the book? The fact that the theft took place is so unnecessary and unbelievable and hard to reconcile at all.
Oh, thank you. That's such a good question. Well, I think, you know, yeah, to answer your question, yes. I mean, One of my favorite chapters in the book is when Portia has this imaginary discussion with Isabella when she sits at the auction house in Paris as Isabella is buying the Vermeer, and she's cheering her on and saying, "You'll never regret buying that painting." And then she goes with Isabella to the Brighton roadway, you know, because Isabella liked horses, which is why she bought some of the Degas drawings of jockeys and horses. So Portia joins Isabella, and she's explaining to Isabella her theory and why, you know, the Degas actually show the tension between dark and light. And Isabella says to Portia, "I don't care, Miss Portia, just get those paintings back." I had so much fun imagining, you know, what Isabella's reaction would be. I mean, what a remarkable person to have built this Venetian palazzo in Boston. I mean, it looks like nothing from the outside, but inside it is just so gorgeous. And then to have put together this amazing collection of art, you know, with stone sculptures from the Renaissance in, you know, in the garden area, and then the incredible Sargent painting, Il Jaleo, of, you know, the flamenco dances. And then, you know, all kinds of great art, like, you know, Chinese screens. And she just had such an eclectic taste, but she really did have a discerning eye. She, you know, everything was special. And if you ever go to the Hearst Castle in California, for example, I mean, he had lots of money and no taste. I mean, there's absolutely no art worth talking about at the Hearst Castle. And, you know, there's some wonderful architecture, and there are, you know, deer and antelope roaming the grounds, and but there's no art that's worth talking about. So the fact that Isabella was a contemporary, although they didn't know one another, they lived on either coast. You know, here's one person with a discerning eye who picked extraordinary art, and another person who didn't have that and didn't, well, actually, he didn't have the humility that Isabella had to hire Berenson to teach her. You know, he just went around Europe and bought whatever struck his fancy. And, you know, it's just so disappointing when you go there and you see what a waste of this gorgeous space. So anyway, are there other kinds of questions, or do you want me to read, or what would you?
So we just had another question, but if there's a lull, you can read from your book, or
Okay.
I have some more questions. Eric asks, so the title of your book is really an homage to Isabella Stewart Gardner?
That's correct. That's correct. It is. It is. I mean, Portia Malatesta, the protagonist, also had a discerning eye, but, you know, it was nothing compared to Isabella. She really, really was scholarly about learning as much as she could about art, what made great art. And then she dared to go off on her own. So
I suppose you could also wonder if it was the thief or thieves that had the discerning eye.
That is so true. Thank you for saying that, Amy. That is so true. Yes.
So you mentioned a heist from, or a theft from the MFA as well. Are there other famous art heists?
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, the Mona Lisa has been stolen like 3 times from the Louvre, at least. The Scream, Nolde's The Scream is another heist. In the book, I list at the end of the book, I list several different kinds of heists that have happened, which are really kind of tragic. I mean, there was one guy who stole a lot. Okay. And Stephen Breit, Weiser, a 30-something French waiter, admitted to stealing 238 artworks and other exhibits from museums traveling around Europe. His motive was to build a vast personal collection. I enjoy art. I love such works of art. I collect them and kept them at home. I mean, this is real. He began stealing art in March of 1995 and was arrested in November of 2001 on the grounds of the Richard Wagner Museum in Lucerne, Switzerland. Keeping the stolen loot, worth about 1 billion, he stored the paintings in his mother's flat in France. Breitweiser specialized in old master paintings from the 16th to 18th century. In January 2005, he was given a 26-month prison sentence. Unfortunately, over 60 paintings, including masterpieces by Bruegel, Watteau, Francois Boucher, and Corneille de Leon, were chopped up by Breitweiser's mother, Mireille Stengel, in what police believe was an effort to remove incriminating evidence against her son. That story just blew me away because, you know, a mother trying to save her son from prison, he really didn't get a very large sentence. You know, and destroying, you know, 60 paintings is just horrible. I think she, as I recall, she burned them in the oven. I mean, it just really makes me very upset. So yeah, there definitely, you know, in Italy, which, you know, the churches in Italy, you know, the older churches have masterpieces in them by Caravaggio and, you know, just all Duccio and all kinds of gems, but, you know, and they're not guarded. But now the Italian government either has copies made that are kept in the churches, or they have, you know, wire put around it, and they have some sort of security mechanism. But, you know, robbing churches has been going on in Italy for a very long time, unfortunately.
That is a heartbreaking story about the oven and the chopping up the works of art. Goodness.
It is heartbreaking. It's
Yeah.
really heartbreaking,
Yeah.
you know, because, you know, I don't know how he got away with, you know, he did this over a period of time and put together this collection. Yeah.
Would you mind reading to us a little bit from your book?
Oh, sure, I'd be happy to. Okay. So this is chapter 7, and it's called The Mafia Had to Be Involved. As the days went by, the talk in the media about the art theft dwelt on false leads and dead ends. Although the museum had reopened, The staff was still in shock. Visitors stood without talking in front of the Dutch room's empty frames. Shortly after the robbery, the museum decided to keep the plundered walls as they had been left. The empty frames served as a constant reminder to the public of their loss. And by keeping the stolen masterpieces alive, so to speak, the staff hoped for their imminent return. To Portia's dismay, no one had been caught with the paintings hidden in a truck or a van. The collective voice of the newscasters was still focused on the theory that a network of art thieves had committed the crime. Yet Portia remained convinced one person had masterminded the robbery. If only to honor her brother's memory, she was determined to continue analyzing the paintings until she could draw a profile of the thief. Also, her museum, the museum where she worked as docent, the Museum of Isabella, deserved her full attention. Portia was even willing to enlist Nick Moretti's help. She now realized she must overcome her revulsion about the mafia, because in this case, they could be useful. Her gut instinct told her the mafia was somehow involved in the heist. Possibly the faux policemen were trained henchmen. Who else but the mafia would do this dirty work? Nick had told her the underworld had a network of its own, and gossip about who did what to whom traveled along its wires. She'd asked Nick to put her in touch with some of those very men. Maybe one of them knew where the paintings were hidden. So that is chapter 7. Anyway, I'm happy to answer any more questions that people might have. I don't know how many of you have seen the docuseries. Does that make you wonder if the mafia was involved? I mean, Portia kind of suspected that since her last name is Malatesta, and she's an Italian American, and her grandfather came from Calabria, from a little town there called Breit, and the mafia were pretty powerful there. And her grandfather left Breit because he wanted to get away from the mafia. So she absolutely hates the mafia and doesn't like the negative association with Italian Americans. So do any of you have questions about that? Or what did you think of the docuseries, if you did see it? No.
Yeah, you can also unmute yourself if you'd rather not type.
Oh, no. Yeah, right.
I haven't seen the docuseries. When did it come out? It was recent, right?
About 3 or 4 weeks ago.
Oh,
it
yeah.
came out. It's Netflix, and it's there are 4 in the series. And, you know, I did see it with my friend Lois, who is here tonight. So, you know, it was really well done. But unfortunately, it shows how the, you know, the FBI was really not on top of this. They were much more concerned with they were arresting a lot of mafia people, but it was around the cocaine trade in Boston. And, you know, art was not high on their list of priorities.
Did you learn anything that you didn't already know from the docuseries? Or was it mostly everything you knew?
I knew a lot. What I found most interesting was the lawyer who represented the mafia figure, Bobby Gentile. He was had a sarcastic sense of humor. And the FBI was really sure that Bobby Gentile was the person who had stolen the art, because they found a list of the art in his home. And so they were absolutely sure. And they dug up his lawn and, everything surrounding his house. And they couldn't find anything other than this list that he had. And he also had, next to the list of all the stolen pieces, he had values, which is kind of weird that he did. But, they couldn't really prove anything. They couldn't find the art. They couldn't prove that he knew the people who were involved in the heist. And so the lawyer was kind of sarcastic about the FBI. And I didn't know anything about the lawyer. I did know that Bobby Gentile's lawn was dug up, everything all around the house. I can't imagine someone hiding art underground. I mean, it would be ruined. That's what I learned that I didn't know. I didn't know about the lawyer. And he seemed more, he knows his client really well. So,
yeah. Can you talk a little bit about your research process for this book? How much time did you spend at the museum? How well do you know the staff? How much time did you spend in like newspaper archives, things like that?
I spent a lot of time at the Gardner before the robbery. It was my favorite place to go, so I just would go there very, very often. The courtyard always made me feel so happy, and just always so beautiful. And so when I decided to write the book, I spent a lot of time at the Gardner, even more time, sort of counting steps and, trying to figure out what the path could have been. And also noticing, what else was in the rooms. So I did a lot of research there. But then I also did a lot of research about the FBI and about, Colombia, because the FBI in my novel discovers that that the profile that Portia Malatesta drew resembles a profile of someone in their database who happens to live in Medellin, Colombia, which was where the cocaine business was happening. And I didn't know anything about the cocaine business, so I did a lot of research about Pablo Escobar, who was the head of the cartel in Medellin. I had been to Medellin many times before when I worked for Polaroid, because my territory was South and Central America. And it's a really, really beautiful, beautiful city surrounded by mountains with a climate that's like eternal spring, like, 75, 80 degrees, no humidity. And it was, before it became the cocaine capital, it was the flower capital. And I believe still today, flowers are flown in from Medellin. But I did a lot of research on cocaine, and that was another interesting thing about the docuseries, because I actually didn't know that the FBI was pursuing these mafia figures, these well-known figures like Whitey Bulger and some of the other people. Well, Miles Connor, I don't think he was involved with cocaine, but um, there is a character in my novel who is the liaison in Boston to the cocaine trade in Medellin, because that's how it operates. And so, I have a scene in the novel where the I don't want to give too much away. The mastermind goes with his father-in-law, who is modeled after Pablo Escobar, and they go to a cocaine factory in the countryside of Colombia. And he is just so horrified at the conditions and the fact that, he knows his father-in-law is in the cocaine trade, but he doesn't know what the realities are. And so he's just so horrified and turned off by this, really the conditions. These people who worked in the cocaine trade made more money, making cocaine than they could have doing any other job in the vicinity. So they earned as much in a day as they would make in like a month, or even more, even longer. So I did a lot of research about the cocaine trade and learned all about Pablo Escobar, how he was like a hero in the barrio because he was very generous with the poor people. He fed them, he built a football stadium, he built a hospital. He did all kinds of things for the people in the barrio that the politicians never did. And so he was a hero there. But at the same time, he had people murdered at the drop of a hat. And, he was a cold, calculating kind of person. At the same time, he was also a loving father and grandfather. So I did, model my character, Don Pedro Martinez, after Pablo Escobar. So I did also research the relationship between the FBI and Interpol, because, Interpol is the international version of the FBI. And, so one of the characters is from Argentina, and he's working with he's liaisoned with the FBI art crime team expert, Julian Henderson. So about a third of the book takes place in Medellin, Colombia. And so I did a lot of research, but I also knew it firsthand in a happier day when it was just this beautiful, beautiful city with fun-loving people, great food. And, I think it's come back to being that. Latin America is still a continent where there are huge disparities between the very poor and the super rich, with, lots of servants and small middle class. Countries like Mexico have a big middle class. thank goodness. But Colombia was ripe for the cocaine trade because they had these incredible extremes of wealth and poverty. And, so the people who decided to go into cocaine trafficking, well, that was a great way to make money. They were from the barrio, and that was a great way to make money. Pull them, there weren't many other opportunities. So anyway, I could talk about South and Central America a lot because I love it. I love the culture, and each country is really unique and individual kind of country. And the Andes are gorgeous. So Colombia has, it's on the water. Cartagena is a gorgeous resort area to this day, but it has mountains and, desert, and it's really, really something.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm sure that your previous experience in South America really helped you a lot with writing that.
It did.
So you mentioned before that writing a novel is a daunting task. You also mentioned that some tips that you had for writers, such as having an outline and getting good feedback from readers. Is there any other additional advice that you have for aspiring authors?
Oh, thank you for asking that. It's definitely like belonging to a writing group where you get both the critique and also lots of support from other writers. Because writing is lonely. It's a lonely kind of profession. It's you and your computer. It used to be you and your typewriter. So it's great to belong to a writing group. I think, the most important thing to say is, it's hard while you're going through this. There are so many, ups and downs where, when you're writing, you think you really nailed it. And then you go back and look at it and say, well, it's not that good, whatever. So you need to hold on to a belief in yourself and in the project, and that your passion for the project is really going to see you through. Yeah. That's my advice.
Thank you. So I put the link to our survey into the chat. Does anybody have any last questions for Carol?
Hi, Amy. Grania here. Hello, Carol. I just had a little observation. I haven't seen the docuseries, but from what I know about the night that the call came in that the museum had been broken into, I don't think they realized to what extent the damage that was done in the museum. I don't even think they realized until the cold light of day as to how many paintings were actually stolen, because they cut them out of the frames. But I will say, though, that anytime I've ever gone and anytime I have relations come out from Ireland, we always go there. And you cannot go to that museum and not come out of there having it having a profound effect on you. I think the decision for them to leave the frames there with the paintings missing is devastating. And wasn't Isabella herself really ahead of her time in the way that she protected the art? And one thing I'd like to mention is the fact it was so sad that her baby died, and that art was her way of coming back to life again. So, it's, as I say, because it's hidden, it's not, you know, it's a beautiful place to go. And thank you very much for writing this book, because it brought the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum back into conversation. And I think it should be, the more it's spoken about, the more we'll eventually get some answers. Well, that is the hope.
That's the hope, for sure. Thank you so much. That you really expressed it beautifully, how, you know, you can't walk out of the Gardner Museum and not be devastated by seeing those empty frames, and especially within the context of all the beauty that she provided for the public to enjoy this special, special place. Um, and yeah, she was definitely a woman who was ahead of her time. That's for sure. I mean, she really could be a little outrageous sometimes, but you know, good for her is my feeling. She would have just, I mean, she would have been grief stricken if she had been alive when this happened. So that's fortunate. At least she's been spared this. But I'm hoping that the docuseries, that my novel, that all the other books, there have been a number of nonfiction books that have been written. I'm really hoping that someday the art will reappear. You know, my fantasy is that the children, the grown-up children of the mastermind will say, you know, after he's passed away or whatever, that they'll say, what are we doing with this? This belongs in the Gardner Museum. We have to give it back to them. That's my fantasy. So I hope it happens. But thank you all for being here tonight and for listening. I really, really appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you so much, Carol.
Thank you, Amy.
All right. Have a good night, everybody.
Okay, take care.